won a Google case
We're
yesterday.
live. We are live.
Okay, we are live. So we won't make any more disparaging comments. Thank you. This is, what is this? Sunset Advisory Commission.
The final meeting.
The final meeting of the real final meeting, not just the final meeting this year, but the real final meeting. So I don't know that we need to introduce ourselves because I don't think there's anybody here that hasn't met everybody. Tracy, introduce yourself to Jessica. And okay, so let's just go. So we have first on our agenda, and it was supposed to be 9:05, and Representative Brumsted, we apologize for that. Me being tardy, and a little glitch here. But do you want to talk to us a little bit about government accountability? And we should acknowledge that both Brian and I are also on that committee. Brian is one of the co-chairs, but we felt it made more sense for somebody from the committee other than us to report the information that we talked about at the last meeting. So Representative Brumsted, if you would like to take over.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. And for the record, I'm Jessica Brumsted, a state representative from Chittenden 7, and I'm here as a member from the Joint Legislative Committee on Government Accountability to ask that you consider sunsetting the Government Accountability Committee as created in Title II, Chapter 28, Section 970, and including language in your formal final report that government accountability merits attention by the standing committees of jurisdiction, the respective government operations committees. Now, let me explain. As you know, the world is vastly different now than it was over a decade ago when GAC was initiated via statute. It is time, perhaps past time, that we look closely at GAC's reason for being, what it is and is not responsible for. We have come to you to place the GAC question in a formalized process, not leaving our recommendation to verbal representation in the new biennium. As you all know, at times it is much easier to start fresh with new legislation than to try and amend the current statute. It is very important to us, the Standing Government Accountability Committee, that we as a legislature not lose the importance of accountability in government, but rather raise it to a level where all legislative committees feel some responsibility to go back and look at the laws we pass to make certain the goals we set out to meet are actually being met. And if not, why not? Does the law need to be tweaked a bit? Are we collecting the data we need to understand the law's impact? Is the entity charged with doing the work meeting legislative intent? We owe this sort of review to the people of Vermont, and we on our committee have seen this in many instances, but it is not the Government Accountability Committee. Over this past year, it has become clear to our committee that our role may be misunderstood, and some of that is a result of the original legislation itself. The statute was written 10 years ago, and our ability to collect data and review that information was very limited and expensive. Our recommendation to develop population outcomes as set forth in Title III, Section 2311, are mostly relevant to state government's department by department program level performance measures informing population level indicators. Assessing, this is jargony, so bear with me, but right out of the statute, assessing the effectiveness of population level indicators in measuring progress to achieve population level outcomes, and annually review population level indicators in the context of new data development. So yes, this is jargony, but essentially what I'm saying is that the state outcomes report is a picture of what is the conditions of life for Vermonters today. It is not a performance report that can inform the legislature if they are meeting the goals of specific legislation. There's clear need in today's world for something closer to a performance report. For example, 6 years ago, we passed legislation to address the need for more early education providers. We created programs that included scholarships and loan repayment. And then we measured the outcomes and learned that, yes, these programs can work and are working. So 2 years later, we added language based on this information to continuously improve upon our work. When we write legislation with performance goals in mind, we need to also think about how will we know if we are meeting those goals? What can we measure to get at that information? And can we afford to measure that? When will the committees of jurisdiction go back and look at that? So there's a lot to be talked about. The good news is there's a lot already happening. For example, Building Bright Futures is collecting data about our childcare centers and early educator providers. The Climate Council is collecting data to show us if our work is having the intended outcomes necessary to reduce carbon emissions, among many other things. And the Office of Racial Equity, the Health Department, the list goes on and on. But as you can see, the bad news is they're siloed. Our committee is hoping that the House and Senate Government Operations Committees might look into a way to connect this data in an easily accessible format so that anyone can log on to the LEDGE website and click to see how we are doing, what kind of impact we are having on reducing the number of homeless, for example, increasing accessibility to quality childcare programs. Presently, Vermonters are unable to access this information, and it seems obvious to all of us that that would be incredibly helpful. In conclusion, I am here this morning to ask simply that you consider sunsetting Title II, Chapter 28, Section 970, the language that created the Government Accountability Committee, and in your formal final report, ask that the standing committees of jurisdiction, the respective government operations committees, explore both how we use evidence to inform policy and as a body, look back at our laws to ensure accountability. Thank you.
So I just have one question, Jessica.
Yes.
Are you speaking for yourself or for the committee?
For the committee. I think I said that a few times.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear.
Okay. Yeah, no, I said it at the beginning and the end.
Yeah. Brian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you really summarized that extremely well, Jessica. You really did. I think if you ask the average Vermonter what they think of when they say government accountability, there's a mismatch between what our committee has done for the last 10 years and what people might expect. It's almost like people feel like someone would be taken to the woodshed and scolded because they weren't being accountable. And that, in fact, is not anywhere near what we have done. So I want to recognize Sue Zeller and Justin for their work. Along the way, we do have dashboards where people can look at specific examples, as you call indicators, to see whether or not objectives are being met. And beyond that, we're in sort of that cloudy neighborhood where I'm not sure some of the provisions of that original statute were ever met, or I'm not sure in what manner we could have met them without funding, which we didn't have. So I think you have put a perfect period at the end of the sentence, if you will, and I think that's what needs to happen.
So I have one comment that we clearly can't put all of that into our report, but we can put the language in there that asks, you had some specific language, but I would suggest, and this is a suggestion only, because you're going to have pretty new government operations committees. And I would suggest that whoever becomes the chair of those two committees, that you give them a copy of what you just said to us so that they can have some context for starting the discussion.
That sounds like a great idea, and I will absolutely do that. Jeanette, sorry, Representative White.
Okay.
The Senator, sorry.
That's okay.
That's okay.
Among
So
friends.
used to calling you Jeanette, but I get confused. Sorry.
I know it's okay. I had this conversation with the president of our bank who's retiring the other day, and he said, now I can call and I can say, this is Dan Yates, and I'm the president of Brattleboro Savings and Loan in Brattleboro, Vermont. And people say, oh, yes, Mr. Yates, what can I do for you? And in January, he said, I'll call and I'll say, hello, this is Dan Yates. And they'll say, who cares? And the same thing is happening to me.
I remember when I left Senator Jeffords' office, I still used it every once in a while when I wanted to get what I wanted. Anyway.
Okay, any more questions or comments for Jessica? Can
I just say one last thing to what Brian had said is that it's really important that people understand that the Government Accountability Committee was looking at that outcomes report, and that shows us a moment in time. It doesn't do what I described as what the public really thinks of. And I think that that's really important. And I hope that I will have an opportunity to go before the government operations committees and explain that to them, because I think that's really, really important. The state is responsible for pulling together that state outcomes report, and it's excellent. And Justin's work and Sue Zeller's work has been superb over the years, and they've done and it's been hard. It's been having to go to each department and have them review what they're doing and, put it through. It's just not what legislators and the public really think of when they think of having accountable government. And that became really clear this year.
So are we moving to sunset or repeal?
repeal?
So I will make a motion that we repeal the Government Accountability Committee.
I will second it.
All right, any more discussion? Okay, just because we have one member who can't officially vote, would you like to just give us your thoughts?
Good idea.
Well, hypothetically, if I could vote, I would vote along with the motion on the floor. I do think it's very appropriate that this gets updated to reflect the current world that we live in, and so I support the motion as proposed, hypothetically.
Yeah, thank you. I just think it's important to make sure that you are on the record with that, so that we all agree. Okay, so.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. All in favor of repealing the Government Accountability Committee? Aye. Oppose? Okay, done. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Don't forget, though, Senator White, that we really like to also include language somewhere that we want the government accountability committees to look at this.
Well, I think that you had a sentence in there near the beginning that if you could email your comments to Tim, then he could pull out that one part that should be in the report. That does that work?
Yes, and it's including language in your formal final report that government accountability merits attention by the standing committees of jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I will.
The government operations committee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and Tim will put it in the format that it should be in for the report.
So Tim, I don't know what's Tim's last name?
Oh, I'm sorry, Tim.
Yes.
Sorry.
Good morning, Representative Tim Devlin. I actually replaced Attorney Emrin Aberjali, who staffed government accountability. So I think I've actually emailed you in the past. It's just T Devlin at Ledge.
Stayed done.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'll send that this morning. So thank you.
And it'll actually go not just in the report, but I think it'll go in the bill along with the, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you very
day.
much.
Go have a snowball fight.
You hope the roads are better on your way home.
Yeah.
I hope so too.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks.
All right, Tanya.
Good morning. For the record, this is Tanya Marshall. I'm State Archivist and Chief Records Officer and Director of the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration. I'm going to share my screen to provide an update on the registry and where we are. And I do want to apologize in advance. I didn't get data to you in between. We have a lot of legislative requests this year. And so we've been balancing a bunch of different acts for this, but willing to continue working, especially with Ledge Council on it. But I think this will be helpful. Let me just get my screen. I'm not going to read through this, but what I'm going to do is start showing you some information, but I just wanted to have the written testimony. So we are focused on the section of law that's a little different than the Sunset Advisory Commission section. It's specifically on 3 VSA 116A that has a definition of state boards and commissions that is a little different than your role. So let me just scroll down a little bit. So I just want to let you know where we're sitting for analytics, and I'll show you what we have on the internal side and how we're compiling this data just for visual, and then how it's starting to shape up for the external public facing. And we're calling it version 1 because I mentioned last time that we are getting a new administration. So we're using the technologies that are available to us, but we expect that to change, especially probably the web platform. So rather than overdeveloping, we just want to make sure we're meeting the criteria, and then we can move forward with 2023. So right now it has 259 state boards and commissions, 270 appointing authorities, and then 2,426 members, and 489 of those are ex officios. There was an ask last time about ex officios and where they, so this would be a secretary or commissioner specifically. Some of the language does have that they can designate, some do not. This is a breakdown on page 2 that I provided in October, for Kraus, specifically where you can see the current breakdown of the data, where the Commissioner of Public Safety rises to the top and being in the most sticky commissions or the designee, and then going to agriculture, health, and so forth. So it's just a breakdown based on one of the questions that was asked. Appointing authorities right now, oops, I have a typo in there. Tracy, you do not have 109, you have 1,090. I was updating it last night because we just added some more.
Save my question.
You would only be so lucky. Speaker of the House with 66, and then Senate Committee on Committees 56. And then what we are doing as a grouping, just for our own, because we're anticipating questions that we might be asked, or questions that we might be asked by the government operations committees or the legislature in general as this moves forward, or the public, is who are the appointing authorities? How many appointing authorities come from external to state government? How many are internal to state government? How many are local government? So we're classifying them right now. This is a running total based on that work. Some of them, when I get to the next screen, you'll see where the names don't always match. So we're trying to figure out who these entities are in some cases. But you'll see the breakdown. It's just in alphabetical order, that domestic nonprofit, and there are some for-profits. There's about 88 appointing authorities in that area. Federal government, 3 appointing authorities, 4 nonprofit and for-profit, 2 local government, 8 state government, the legislative branch, 20 different appointing authorities. State government, executive branch, 79, and then 3 with the judiciary. So this would be where it says in statute, shall be appointed by, and it says, yep.
Can I ask you a question about that? State government legislative branch, there are 20 different appointing authorities?
It might
What does that mean?
say as appointed by, yeah, I'll have to look at the data where that was coming out on the legislative front for it, but it might be based on not just saying that it's the Senate, it's the speaker, or it's the pro tem. It could be as, appointed by the House Government Operations Committee, as appointed by the House, different committees.
On committees.
And that might be a good way to just segue. I'll show you what we're planning internally.
Okay.
So this is using Microsoft 365 SharePoint. It's one of the applications that's available throughout the executive branch. It's a platform that is replacing share drives. It's been around for over a decade. We're using this. One of the advantages that we have is that with the appointing authorities being, if they're primarily in the executive branch, it gives us the ability to streamline some of the data. So when I talked about data architecture last time, how are we going to get this information so it's seamless? The governor's office is our use case for that because they do a lot of appointments, not just for this registry, but a lot of different appointments. So I've been working with Tracy, and she's been very patient. Although I did have a long meeting with, so she saw what looks like behind the scenes to compile this. So I'm sure she'll be happy to provide her insights. We have master lists. So our first list of master is this boards and commissions list. And what it does, it'll give you a visual of where we're standardized. So we'll get the name of the board, the legislation that created it, and if it's administratively attached to a specific agency, we'll do that. This column right here is kind of in progress because it's not always clear. And we find it through different ways. We do have a lot of requests, and we are building the registry from agencies and departments to know comprehensively which boards and commissions are attached to them, especially on the per diems. It's a budget cycle for that. So we're seeing even more increase just from knowledge that we're building this. From here, we'll update and we'll collect more information. That's where we're streamlining it right now. So an example on the access board, our data collection, B classes, we use a standardized terminology that comes from how the legislature is defined. And then we standardize because we have Vermont starting. We're going to have a very long list. So normally what we do is do indirect order for that reason. So that's our B class name, but we're starting to fix that to make sure it's streamlined with this. And then we'll have the actual name and statute. So we started compiling based on just the text within the legislation. And now we're actually streamlining on standardizing the data to make it much easier for the public and easier for us to know when there's differences. We're looking at the chair decisions. How are they decided? Is it defined in the statute? Does it say membership shall select, membership shall elect? I don't know if there's a difference, but there's a difference in how it's worded. We're looking at all those differences. If it's administratively attached, what session did it get added? And then we're starting to move through some of the changes that are coming out of this commission. Is there a sunset date? Is there not a sunset date? And thinking ahead to what that's going to look like in 2025, because that's when the other section of 3BSA 116A comes through. And then we marked whether or not it was on the original 2021, the last inventory that you had. And then also we're looking at so different variables that we're collecting. Do you want me to walk through the rest of this first? Is that helpful to you or not helpful? Just to let you know like where we're getting like the seat composition, how that looks. I can make this bigger too if you'd like.
That would be helpful,
Okay.
at least for me.
Is there a screen there?
So this is where we're counting seats. So we've gone through every single statute and Tracy participated very nicely with one of them. We walked through it. Sometimes they're hard to read, as are the executive orders when we're reading those as well. So what this is telling us, this is our seat count. So what it's saying to me is that the access board has an ex officio named in statute. That's obviously an ongoing kind of position there. It doesn't have a term set, although the designees might change. The qualifications, what we're looking at is what does it actually say in the language? So we'll say commissioner of public safety or designee. Some of them do, some of them don't. And then it'll say who is the actual appointing authority. So in this case, it's not the same as doing a direct appoint, but we know that's coming from the Department of Public Safety. So what this enables us to do is that if I'm looking at down all the different boards that we have or commissions, I can pick one of them and it will filter out the list and it will tell us what this looks like for us, giving us a count. If I want to know if there's any ex officios, this just has regular members. And if I wanted to see if there's a different form of who is, so here's where you see 3 different appointing status. The Senate Committee on Committees can do an appointment. The governor's office can do an appointment, and Speaker of the House can do an appointment. So if I look at the Speaker of the House, there's 2 board members listed there. If I was to open this up and say, where is this language coming from, and picked it up, this is what our staff, we have been doing as we've been reading through all the legislation and identifying what this is saying and trying to make it meaningful in that regard. So that is, that's this breakdown. So this is just telling me this little boards and commissions, and this is the memberships roster, essentially. So these are just the positions. And then the appointing authorities, this is what we're working on now. So again, these are just master lists. So we know everyone who's a player in this particular registry that we need to contact or work with and get information from. And this is where the next page, when we get to my testimony, you'll see this. This is looking at the different appointing authorities. It does the same thing. It's what's listed in this master. And then we can go down the list. And some of them you'll see we've marked just flagging them because they've been dissolved in some way. And then there's others that aren't really clear. So those are the ones that we were working on. But if I wanted to say, okay, what does it look like for House? That's where we're starting to track how many ex officios are on there and how many appointees do they have. So we have some other tracking mechanisms for appointing authorities. And then we have our master people index, which we're just building. We're starting with the governor's data. Based on appointments for that. And so this is the mass. So it's getting to be those actual names, but you can have one person on multiple boards. You can have one person appointed over time. You want to have a master people index. And so the way the registry is going to pull it together is on, this is just a mock-up screen that we have, but it'll give you some idea. And this is just in development. So, this look and feel will be different, but we just want to make sure we can push the information correctly to a website and that it can be interactive. So that's what we're working on right now. So what this gives us is the ability to, this is a whole list of it, but eventually it'll give someone the opportunity to do a drop down. And if they are able to search, it'll be, if I submit this, it should, yeah. So we'll start kind of winnowing down. If we wanted to look at, in this case, we've only populated a little of this for the access board to show what this looks like. It'll give an idea about who the appointing authority is. There's membership criteria. So that's coming from statute. So it would say, the House Committee on Corrections of Institutions, this is their chair. That's why it's an ex officio. This is actually who's sitting in that according to the access board right now. And there's also a way to do a name search. So that will be a functionality. This is still going to be developed out till we get that master list. But that's what we have someone else in my division working on for us. And they'll give you an idea. So this would be for this particular, this right here is marked in a way because one, you're sunsetting. So we're not going to put your information in for January 1st. Sorry. But it's also one of these ones that we have a question on if it's a legislative committee or an executive branch committee based on the scope of what's the definition that's sitting in Title III, 116A, which I'll get to later in my testimony. So this is just inside. This is being developed for outside. A lot of data is being extracted from your statutes and analyzed and put into some meaningful, what we call knowledge to provide insights for that. And then getting back to my written testimony, and this is where those numbers would have came from. So as I'm sorting and doing the totals, the data right now is showing, for example, that there's 20 different entities being listed as an appointing authority, but they may only have one, or they might be an ex officio, by the way, that could be where that's coming up. We do have about 20, I think there's 19 right now in total, where these authorities are, appointing authorities are terminated in terms of the corporation's database. If you like, I can show you how we look that information up. And we did just verify that it's still true for these. Did you want to see how that looks?
Can I just ask a question about this? If you look, for example, under Emergency Service Provider Wellness Commission, it looks like the Vermont, if I'm reading this right, the Vermont Ambulance Association can no longer appoint somebody because they have been terminated?
Well, that would be a question for the legislature. What we're looking to see is some of the legislation for some of these boards and commissions hasn't been updated in a number of years. So part of that was because we're doing the registry, we need to contact the appointing authorities to find out who they have appointed to the different boards and commissions. So as part of that process, we're identifying who they are. And when we're doing that work, we're checking in our corporations database if we can't find contact information. And in doing so, what we're finding is that some of them have been terminated. It doesn't mean that they're not still active.
Right.
They're just not active and registered as a nonprofit or they have lost their status.
So,
Because they haven't made a biannual filing.
They either have not. I can show you what this looks like for this one. Would you like me to do that?
well, I'm just curious. So the Vermont Fire Chiefs Association is inactive. They're an inactive organization? Is that what?
Yeah. So
Or is their member on the,
what this is saying is that the Vermont Fire Chiefs Association has one appointee status, or they have an ex officio status on the Emergency Service Provider Wellness Commission. But when we go to look at the Vermont Fire Chiefs Association to find a contact to help get the data, is that we're finding that we can't find them. And then we double check the corporations within the Secretary of State filings. And what we're finding is that they have not filed recently. So they've either had their status as a nonprofit terminated, or they're labeled as inactive. It's in terms of whether or not they should be appointing, that's for the legislature, but it is information that we're gathering in case that's helpful to the General Assembly as you review some of these, because there are some that do not exist anymore. And if they truly do not exist, the membership may not be what the General Assembly originally intended. Senator Whiteley, would you like me to show you just what the corporation's database looks like?
no, I do know what it looks like because I've used it, but I just, okay. So the Vermont State Nurses Association has been revoked. They didn't forget to file. They just have been revoked. Is that?
There's different status within the corporations division based on time frame and what kind of entity they are. So what we're just doing is what is labeled in the corporations database. Sometimes they've been notified, for example, if they haven't refiled. Some of them merge and they're new entities. So they
Okay.
2 or 3 nonprofits that got merged.
Okay.
Usually I have one there that says merge because now they're underneath an assumed name, but they're actually not filed as a nonprofit. There's a lot of, you open up that door and you end up going.
Yeah.
But what does revoked mean? Because that's like, did the Secretary of State take action to revoke their nonprofit status, or?
Secretary of State's office usually doesn't take action to
I know.
revoke, but it would be that they were notified several times and didn't, and depends on the time frame. So I'd have to look up, so let's look up the revoked one. Do you mind if we spend some time just so you're aware, or that if anyone, the Vermont Nurses Association, let me just type it in here.
While she's looking that up, you might want to tell Jim Finger that they need to file.
State Nurses.
The Ambulance Association.
Some of them are based on time frames, so that's why our laws have changed on the corporation status. So where it says revoked, it could have been revoked if you failed to file, but that would have been a law that was consistent for a certain time. So that's why I like to look at the dates. So this one right here, so this is the Vermont State Nurses Association. It's listed as being, so I have the status, it says it's revoked here. So in our database for our Secretary of State, they made a notation of it. It's technically inactive but the last filing date, the last time they filed was 1982. So.
That is pretty inactive.
So under this particular situation, for those laws at that time, failure to file, because the legislature did pass legislation to say that the Secretary of State's office had to sunset and revoke nonprofits who failed to file on a 5-year. So it was, there was a number of lack of filings for status. And so I just know this because we were spending a lot of time in here for not this purpose, for another purpose, and helping different associations understand their status for that. So for nonprofits in particular, there was legislation passed where the General Assembly, the Secretary of State's office at the time reported there's an issue, we're not getting timely reports, and the General Assembly enacted law to say within, X amount of time you have to file or your nonprofit status is going to be revoked. This would be in a situation on that would have been timing for that. So it's possible that, they're under a different name. It's also, if we look at this data, and this is why I like doing so this is the STAIN board. If we went back in here, what we'd want to look at, so if it came from this commissioner, General Assembly or alleged counsel to say, what does this look like? Or how do we kind of problem solve around this? Then, my first step in this database in the back would be, let's look at what this looks like for this association, right? So it's an ex officio. So it's the executive director of the Vermont State Nurses Association or designee who sits on this board. And then, so underneath that name's revoked. It doesn't mean that there's not another association that actually is representative, but it doesn't match the current statute. And so that would be the difference here. So we would look at this one. This is the SANE board. This is where it gets listed. You see it here as the executive director on the top. And then I look down to say, okay, well, this was added in 2015. So it's fairly new legislation. It's possible that it was from another group because we have a lot of, there's one particular board that has domestic violence task force associated with it, and those task force don't seem to exist anymore. So it's possible this is a recodified law or a revamp that carried over older language, thinking that that entity still existed underneath that name. For each one of those, then it would be a little bit of separate step problem solving. Does it really exist? Is it a different name? How can we provide that information to the legislature?
Okay.
So some of these look like government entities, like the state planning office.
Pardon?
Some of these look like they're government entities or.
Right, so the State Natural Resources Conservation Council hasn't existed I think it's been in statute a long time, and maybe you're sunsetting it or have created it. But the Board of Forests and Parks hasn't existed. It's a different name.
Okay.
And the state planning office was eliminated under
State
governor.
office. So there are things that are still in statute, but they haven't really existed in that frame. So this is what this is exposing is, we're getting into legislation, which is all good. This is what we're here to do. It keeps us busy, which is great. We're here to provide knowledge. It's not, we're here to extrapolate information and provide it to you. I think this gives the opportunity for ongoing communication with the Alleged Counsel, in particular, that will help, kind of inform where you might want to do some changes, and it could be more research that we provide to the General Assembly. But as we're compiling it, what we're doing is flagging.
Okay.
So these are the ones that we're currently finding that they just do not, they don't exist for different reasons. Then Leclerc has.
Rob, go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you. Outstanding job, Tanya. This really certainly exceeds my expectations. A couple of questions I have around this is one, is there some boilerplate language that looks like we should be including in legislation going forward? Like we have asked about sunset dates for any new prospective boards, but it's looking like there's an awful lot of information here that you folks are going to be needing to get this information in this database accurately and timely. Should some language be included that says that, everything, has to be sent to the Secretary of State's office, to the administration? Do you have any recommendations around that?
So right now in statute, it's already set that we can define how we want to receive the information for the registry. So I'm not concerned about You're speaking in regards to the boards and commissions themselves and their appointing authorities, Representative Leclerc?
Well, what I'm speaking about is any future legislation that includes either expanding a board or a new board or commission, as to just exactly how that information would be required in the legislation. So that you're able to get it in the format that you need it.
Right. So what we're working on right now is trying to identify the best form of, we're using this experience to understand between the boards themselves, boards and commissions, I'll just use boards, and the appointing authorities, who are the better sources for that information when that happens. And then when you create, as a legislature, a new board or commission, we do have the legislative clerking function. So we do see all legislative acts as they come through. We scour them for all different things as part of our, we sign the act number. So we do review that. One thing that could come out of this particular commission before this commission sunsets, and I have that on the next page, is where the scope of the commission was broader than the registry. And it is, so it's a question more I have on the sunset. But I think since we don't have to report until 2025 for the, well, Council has to do the reporting, but they need to use the data from us, that next year will be more defining for us to be able to report back to the General Assembly with some recommendations. Yeah,
I think that does. Thank you, Tanya.
Yeah, it's hard, you know, and I think back to where we started in 2018 and maybe 19 before COVID. And, you know, I did provide, you know, even recommendations for what a commission, like what you would define as a commission, what would you define as a committee. And now reviewing the actual ways that the legislature has done those, you know, I would still want to step back and review that to make the better recommendation. So I think it's more the information's coming forward, and that's providing the knowledge that the General Assembly needs and that we need. And then we're starting to anticipate the types of questions that we will be getting once there's more exposure. I think we're in good track, though. We have all the information populated, but working through like what is the best mechanism. And some of it has to do, even something like SharePoint that we're compiling internally, you know, that's not accessible as an entity to the legislature. So I would not be able to add, for example, Tim without a lot of extra work. So thinking about those different ways that, you know, across the branches, we go across all the branches, and trying to find the best, most simplistic way that meets majority, that makes it much easier for their workflows. But if there's any actionable steps you would like or something, this we can definitely do more work on. I haven't reviewed for some of the boards and commissions which ones are on your list for sunsetting. So that's part of, you know, it is a moving target for us. So these numbers and things may change because some of them might be. So what I have in here, this is going to get to some of our recommendations on it. So we're continuing to work through this. The session law ones are obviously more difficult because we feel very confident if it's in current legislation, we're able to find it, we're able to collect the data from it, we're able to dissect it and get it ready for the registry. There are some things that you, as a Sunset Advisory Commission, have found that is on your inventory, and that is that our registry is supposed to be your inventory kind of moving forward. I was re-looking at this last month, and you know, for the definition that's sitting in for the registry, and I know that we sat there and discussed it before COVID, I would have some recommendations that maybe we focus that definition a little bit more narrow coming out for the registry. And one of the questions that I had is because, well, let me just finish this part. One, there's a lot of areas in statute where the General Assembly has given authority to different secretaries and commissioners to create different advisory. So in addition to session law, we now have something that might be sitting in the executive branch or others that we have, there's just nothing there. It's not a rule. There's no way to really find it. I'd feel more confident if we're able to focus on the legislation that's passed and get the registry built and up and running and not have to focus so much time trying to figure out from these different agencies and departments what they may have created because they're unable to do. So that would be a question I have, because the definition for the registry puts all these in scope. And there's a lot of advisory, and we are receiving questions on, what does it mean to be in advisory capacity under forms of legislation? So these are two statutes that are specific within the Agency of Human Services. You will see it's from a time frame. Oh, I forgot to put the other part. But it's from a time frame, that if you trace that back, you'll see different areas where the legislature was trying to back away and not formalize, some things. So there are many of them. I have one in my statute in 3 VSA 117. I can create an advisory committee to advise, so there's nothing there for us. The question would be, is it really something that we would want to chase down? The other thing, and I'm looping back between the legislation that created this commission and the legislation on the registry. The intent on the registry is very specific on the intent for the sunsetting. But there's a number of boards and commissions and councils, even by executive order, where the legislature, I don't think, can sunset. I'm not sure, I'm not an attorney, but I think the sense was that it was created by the General Assembly, then the General Assembly wants to run on a 5-year sunset with a review. However, the definition that's there includes boards and commissions that are created at the federal level. It includes boards and commissions that might be created as advisory capacity. It includes a number of things that you will not have within state law, and therefore is not, I don't think, going to be able to be sunsetted based on the intent of the legislation. So and I can run the data more succinctly, but my recommendation would be, at least for the start of the registry, that if we focused on the state laws that we know that we have, that the General Assembly has created that board or commission, that will make it much more succinct, at least starting out. So it's just something that I noticed now that we have the information that I would not have been able to advise. But if the intent was sunset, I don't see that as being a possibility with, the governor's executive orders to create different councils. For some of the other areas where there's a federal law that's creating these the planning committees, there's a lot of areas that are on the current registry that we've been building because it's been coming out from the sunset advisory. Where we're finding more. Every day we find more on this definition.
So let me make sure I understand what you're suggesting, that we change the definition of state board or commission from what it is here to just include those that are created by the General Assembly and are subject to the sunset.
Yes, it would be my recommendation to match the intent of that legislation. And if I'm interpreting the intent of that legislation correctly, it sounded like the intent was for boards and commissions that were, acknowledged and even if it was codified, it could have been a commission that was already existing, but the legislature took an extra step to formalize it and create legislation around it. Because that to me is where it can say, yes, I guess you could say it's out of scope, then underneath that ceased to exist after 5 years because it wasn't created by state law. And we could still continue to build a registry, but it's hard for me to say what's the most value starting out on year one and to meet the intent versus what we keep seeing as more and more advisory, there's just much larger than the 259 that we have identified so far. where would you like us to focus our efforts? I guess, we can continue and revisit. I just want to make sure I'm meeting this definition, and this definition is, now that we know, and even, with the governor's office, with Tracy, spent a lot of time, there was one, that it's sitting in a federal law for the state to create, and then it's somewhat within a rule, and then what's existing doesn't quite match. It's even difficult for me to know if I put it on the registry or how to find the membership. So it seems like sometimes it can be a can of worms that doesn't need to be opened right immediately. But in order to be accurate with the registry, we'd have to open up that can of worms.
Good analogy. I like that. Accurate.
It's been a wonderful I think this is government accountability. It kind of brings everything up there. We're looking forward to having more dashboards to help. So I do think the intent overall would be helpful to know what are the state boards and commissions. But moving into the first round of it, the question to me is the definition meeting the intent, and how can we be most valuable to the General Assembly in this endeavor?
So you would propose that our language be closer to our intent?
Pardon?
It would be closer to the intent language than the definition?
Yeah, if there's an opportunity to refine, starting out for, the initial part of it, and then I think that gets to Representative LeClaire, and what do we want to do moving forward if there's a new board or commission? How do we enable that? That enables us to focus our time with the General Assembly on the legislative acts that have created that. And we can keep compiling, but we won't be trying to track those appointees in the other areas. But we can definitely make the General Assembly aware that we haven't covered, the executive orders for, Tracy, we came across 6 more yesterday that weren't on your list either. So we're definitely, it's a moving target.
So does Tim have the language that we would put in here for definitions? Or is this isn't the language that you're proposing?
No, this isn't current.
Right. So does Tim have?
I have not.
Because today is our last day.
Because I wanted to make the recommendation here to the.
Okay. So it would just be crossing off 5 lines of the current definition. I mean, it would be just reducing that, right? To reflect what is in the intent.
Yeah, I mean, I can suggest language and do that and send that back. I would look at, some of these, I can pause too, other questions I have, and maybe this will help answer what that definition looks like. The Office of Professional Regulation has moved to advisors. It's neither a board, it doesn't have a chair, it's just advising the director. Would that be in scope? Within this definition, it's in scope.
Right, yeah.
But it's not the same look and feel. They're not doing policy. They don't have a chair. Are there other criteria? Because I can show you what we're compiling that might inform how you want to do this definition if you're open to revising it. Simple.
Yeah, simple.
Well, but we create a lot of advisory commissions. So
I think we should be really heavy-handed about the names that we use. And it just drives me insane. I was just we have task forces, and those are really one thing, right?
Yeah.
We have working groups, then we have committees, boards, councils, and commissions. And we should not be a commission. This is a committee. This isn't a commission. So, and I don't know how we do it, how we make committee chairs and drafters follow a definition. So if it is in fact a task force or a working group, it goes, and a board is different than a committee. A board and a commission, in my mind, exists kind of outside. It's like the Human Rights Commission.
It's independent.
It's independent. We are not a commission. I don't understand how we can't.
Could there be a flow chart that in creating these, does it operate independently? Is it got one singular?
Yeah.
A flow chart, then it's a this, then it's a this.
We've been analyzing how it's been used, and it definitely is a time frame change that works through this. But I agree, and I pulled up what we've been doing is going through and looking at, for each of these, the advisory committee, let's look at that one for the agricultural fairs and field days. What we're trying to do is identify, are there patterns that we see from legislation time periods? Because this one, this actually has some additional kind of roles in terms of grants. So is there a fiscal component? Is there a policy component? Is there a chair? Is there something that's happening there? And this is 13, because I agree that the terminology has not been used consistently. And that we're anticipating and we're seeing already is that there are questions that are coming up. If it's just a task force and it's a short-term task force, and it's not a chair, it's just people coming together to brainstorm on a topic or to problem solve for a short term, but it doesn't name a chair, it doesn't name certain policy. Is it the same equivalent what you'd have for purposes? Because we're gonna get those, we already have started to receive those open meeting law questions on that too. I mean, we can analyze it, but you're not going to find a good pattern in current legislation.
No, I was suggesting going forward. I know that what exists right now is a mishmash, but it does seem to me that we can.
And I can pull up the testimony I provided in 2018.
You had some definitions.
I broke it down based on what would be the concepts for that, and I'm happy to pull that up.
Right, I think it was the Tracy's kind of guidelines about what is it, does it, yeah. And boards in my mind are very different than committees.
But I think that can be maybe a recommendation. We could make a recommendation to the House and Senate GovOps committees because they will be the one, I'm assuming, sponsoring the bill coming from this commission for new legislation, right? And then the secondary part is like, okay, well, let's now review the boards and commissions, quote unquote, boards and commissions that have been created. And is there a structural name? Is there a name change that should be considered? Because they tend to now meet this more, so it's kind of collecting information, but it allows for any new commissioner board that gets created to go through some type of workflow discussion with the committees, or at least controlled within Ledge Council, to advise the committees that this is what we're looking for if you are considering creating a new body and what the terminology could be. And then it could be a secondary looking at what's already been created and whether or not this should rise to levels, not a committee, it really is working as a commission.
Yeah, and I think that the real work is going to end up, unfortunately, having to be done by Ledge Council, because that's where, I mean, we got 2 bills last year. I'm just thinking of this. We got 2 bills last year that set up commissions. And really, they were just advisory committees. They were set up as commissions, and we changed them in our committee. But somehow the people, the Ledge Council that advise, they came from economic development or from whatever that is in the House. So and we don't see, GovOps doesn't see all the bills, and if there's a committee or a commission put on there, or an open or public records or open meeting, any of that stuff is supposed to be reviewed by GovOps, but it clearly doesn't happen. And especially at the end of the session, when you have 74 bills that are coming and health and welfare decides they're going to create a commission and economic development says they're going to create a board. And so I'm not sure how you do
A
it.
drafting tool to me is the more information that legislative council has during drafting, and then how legislative council kind of works within its team. But we're able to provide that information, and we are providing that information for the, 2025 is the deadline related to alleged council using the registry information to help.
Okay.
The challenge is like the government operations committees are pretty aware of this issue. But there are other committees that have no understanding of it, and I don't think their legislative council does it either.
Also put on our typographical technical error legislative hat when it comes to us for acts and look and say, oh, this doesn't look like it quite matches what the intent was.
Yeah, but you can't change it at that
Yeah,
point.
we have to send it, it have to be put in for a technical correction.
But it wouldn't, you would not, the committee that created it would not consider that a technical correction. Because if health and welfare creates something that they think is a commission or a board, they're not going to rest easy if we say, well, really, that wasn't a board or a commission, that was a task force. And you make a technical correction, it's not gonna pass. I mean, it's not going to be accepted and pass, it's already passed, but, so it has to happen before.
But I can show you, in case it's.
Well, I
They're
mean,
not gonna,
well, if it's a new board or commission,
Yeah.
you could, that's the easy fix. It's the pre-existing.
well, it's easier.
It's easier.
It's easier.
Whereas the pre-existing ones, but.
Yeah, we're never gonna.
Well, you could, as part of the sunset process, when they do come up every 5 years for sunset, I mean, you could direct that they have to look at the name or at least educate the legislative council that they have to check the name to see if it meets the, whatever definitions we decide.
That's a good way to do it. When it comes up on the 5-year cycle, that's when you look at the name instead of trying to go back and look at them. But, and for the new ones,
Because it's like, if we were to say, okay, advisory boards, commissions, whatever we want to call them, that have the word advisory in them, we're not going to look at it anymore. I'm just going through this list.
Yeah, no.
There's so many advisory boards and commissions, it's crazy.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but they have different roles, and that's why it's hard for me. Like, I could give you percentages, or I could inform. I don't, I can't. I like to analyze more information to provide something that would be more concise. But even looking at advisory, which we're coming into, it's most of them are, sometimes making policy level. So it's what's the criteria that you have on the advising, or what is it? One of those statutes where it's a committee, but it's actually doing more. I do think that those who were on, a commission or board, however defined, would like clarity. And I think this is going to cause visibility. So considering that's what we're anticipating, what are the kind of questions, but we can say it's not going to be answered. We're compiling this information, we're providing information back to the General Assembly. And from there, there will be the naming component would be a big one. And then deciding to what is a short-term, long-term, what is something that is, especially within the executive branch, when you do have the ability to just have advising components, but it's not a public body underneath the open meeting law per se. We're going to find a lot of these because they haven't been created in statute. And there's inconsistencies there. So I can see within statutes where the legislature is clear and is subject and is a body and subject to the open meeting law, and then somewhat silent in some others, or saying not subject to the open meeting law, which tells me there's some type of discussion happening. And fascinating.
Yeah, I somehow missed the idea of not reviewing anything that was advisory, because, SPAC is advisory, but
advisory is used a lot, but you do have areas within the statute where a secretary or commission or some type of public official can create their own advisory committee, and there's no parameters around that. So I think the word advisory is used differently throughout the legislation. So some benchmarks I would look for is this body intended to be a public body? Is this body intended to have a chair? Is this body intended to have term limits and real, like actual appointments, or are these advisory just get together inside a room to do something for a short period of time? Because we have a lot, I'm pulling it up here. These are all ones that don't even have term limits. And you can see, you know, going across some of them. And some of them may not even meet the Board of Advisors for the Entrepreneur Seed Capital Fund. That's a very specific fund. I think, did you and I talk about that, Tracy? It's a very specific fund. So it's like, do you want the Board of Advisors to that kind of, there's a lot going on with the legislation right now.
So
it's all good. It's all good. I don't want to have it. I think it just gives.
why don't instead of allowing commissioners and secretaries and stuff to create advisory, they're really working groups, aren't they? I mean, for the most part, unless they're permanent, or, I mean, if you just gather 7 people in a room and say, we're going to work on this issue.
I can look to see how many working groups we have that have.
I mean, I think of those as not advisory committees, but anyway, there's no way of getting.
What if you say the Secretary of Agriculture could create a advisory group committee to advise the Secretary on XYZ? Hemp.
And so is that an official advisory committee or not?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
And I'm fine with you staying with the definition. We just may not capture everything that was intended by that definition. I just wanted to point out on the intent part as a start is that the intent, if the intent is focusing just on those entities that the legislature can make a decision on sunsetting.
Right. No, that makes sense. I mean, changing the legislation to focus on what we put in our intent versus what we put in our definition makes sense. I mean, then the next step is, do we create definitions of what is a board, what is a commission?
Right. And
you know.
Yeah.
Would you like me to pull up my previous testimony to look at that now, or do you want me just to?
Well, I guess what I'm struggling with is that this is our last meeting.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, changing the definition of what a state board or commission is, I think is something that's doable. I don't know if we have time to iron out what's the definition of a commission, what's the definition of a board.
No, you're right. You're right.
Or what's the definition of a working group.
I think we should tell the 2 government operations committees
Yes.
to work on that since neither one of us will be on either one of them.
Well, no, I think it's important.
But I think it is important, and I think that there should be some thought behind it. And I think what you presented is a good starting place, but I think that you're going to need the buy-in from committee chairs and from leadership, because what I form in my committee is important enough to be called a board or a commission. It is not a task force or a working group.
You're absolutely right.
And that's the attitude you're going to get. So unless you have everybody kind of buying into it and have some discussion, it's just not going to work.
I'm here to provide the information. So we're in statute either way, continuously providing this to the legislative council that needs to use it. So I feel like as long as we're having this dialogue and continuing to work together, you know, on providing this information as seen fit, when there's an opportunity to say, hey, what do you see? What could be a possible recommendation based on current, you know, boards and commissions, for lack of a better term, and what's coming through, then we're always available to provide those recommendations based on the latest information that we have. But in prepping for that information, that's where the sunset question came up on the intent, because it wouldn't be applicable to some of the entities.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, to put those in sync.
So, Tanya, can you get language to Tim today on changing the definition?
Try to get it today. Yeah, I have to be in, but I can look at.
Because we're done as of today.
Oh, okay, so
This is our last meeting.
I will do that before I leave the building.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
And then I just, we're just in concluding, I want to let you know that the registrar is Jason Ross, he's a member of our team. So we're really pleased to have him. And we're posting for technical services. Yeah, like in IT, we haven't had some of those resources in last year. So I feel like we're going moving into it, and Jason will be taking the lead, and he's already starting to work with the different commissions and boards and appointing authorities. And he will be following up with you. If we can get the governor's office, then the rest are smooth sailing.
I'm there, you got him.
And that is, just unshare my screen here.
So do we need a motion to change the definition, or are we just gonna?
Well, let's get the language first,
Okay.
and do you think?
Yeah, we need the
we'll
language.
get the language first, and then we'll,
I'm going to sit right back here.
okay.
Okay.
And thank you all so much.
Oh, no, thank you very much.
Great work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good work.
Very detailed work.
I really enjoyed it. If you ever need someone in the legislature, behind the scenes, I don't want to be in.
No, the challenge will be educating all the legislative council to get it right. I mean, government operations will be the first one to get it right. The two committees.
Yeah.
It's the committees that don't create a lot of boards and commissions on a regular basis who are going to get it wrong. Like healthcare.
Yeah,
Some of
That's why I use
some of the
healthcare.
commissions that they have created in the recent past are just too big.
the one with 47 members or
Yeah.
something.
And so I think some of your discussion previously too was that if there's an agency or department, or if there's some entity that can take on or absorb some of that work, maybe that's, in addition, even better than creating just a separate one-off, boards and commission, depending on the intent.
And sometimes you just need sounding boards. You don't need a committee. You just need
Think tank.
think tank.
Well, there's
That's the
another
word.
entity.
Yeah,
Pick another.
but you know what happens? It's like, okay, this is
Thank
a
you.
hot issue this session. And we need to create a commission to look at.
I know.
That always happens. It's like, oh, it's a big issue.
And,
We
and
need to
it's,
throw a lot of people at this.
and it's my committee, and by George, it's really important. Okay. Thank you, Tanya.
Yes, I will be here and here.
So we have a nice little big bill here, 62 pages. So Tim, you're gonna walk us, this is your first walkthrough of a,
It is, yes. Happy to start here. Well, good morning, commission members. And I should just say initially, it may kind of give you the sense that this is longer than it really kind of is in substance. 40 pages are stricken in entirety, but for reasons I'll get into a little bit later.
right.
Include. So probably closer to 20. But anyways, for the record, my name is Tim Devlin, and I'm an attorney in the Office of Legislative Counsel. I've drafted a bill to serve as a vehicle for the Sunset Advisory Commission's recommendations. As currently written, this bill will either repeal or prospectively repeal approximately 10 different boards and commissions, and will amend one commission's provisions. This will be updated to reflect any additional recommendations made by the committee from today's meeting, of course. Just for reference, I have organized these sections by title order.
Okay.
And will address each of these in turn now. So section 1, which begins on page 1, the amendment language regarding the Vermont Pension Investment Commission was provided by their chair, Thomas Golonka, at the request of this commission, the Sunset Advisory Commission, and then modified by our office's drafting guidelines. Substantive changes include the removal of the requirement that the compensation from the funds be limited to 1/3 of the salary of the treasurer, and the removal of the requirement for the treasurer's office to provide administrative and technical support to this commission. This is the only commission that isn't really being sunset or prospectively sunset right here. The rest, section 2, which also begins on page 1, I believe. Nope, sorry.
Page 2.
On page 2.
Do we ask questions as we go along, or do you want us to wait all the way to the end?
You certainly can.
Yeah.
Maybe right away. Yes, please.
I have a question, I understand the changes. I'm just wondering, do we really want to leave the compensation up to the chair with nobody approving it? It just doesn't seem like a responsible thing to do. Just the way it reads, I make my own salary and nobody okays
Well,
it.
it's the other members of the commission that set the salary.
We don't want anybody from, I mean, they're all on their own now, but we don't want anybody from the administration or from the treasurer's office or anybody saying that's okay.
Well, we'll go through the budget process.
It will have to go through budget, but I think that we purposely tried to set them up as independent as possible
Yeah.
from the treasurer's office and from the, I mean, it'll go through the budget process. Yeah.
Okay, no,
That was a good question.
thank you.
So section 2, beginning on page 2, will repeal agricultural finance program advisory panel, namely by repealing Title 10 VSA section 213D. And then there's another section, subsection E, which contains a single reference to it there, which will be excellent. Section 3, which begins on page 4, will repeal the Coalition for Healthy Activity, Motivation, and Prevention Programs, or CHAMPS, as well as the Fit and Healthy Advisory Council. Both of these appear in the same section. It is Title 18, VSA Section 11, and so the entirety is slated to be repealed. Section 4, on page 4, will repeal the Birth Information Network Advisory Committee. Title 18 VSA Section 993 is the primarily relevant section for this committee, and we feel the cleanest way to repeal this is just to repeal the entire section. And there is another section with a subsection which has a single reference to it, which will be excised as well. That's 991 subsection H. And both of these we've opted to display for clarity for the reader. Section 5 on page 5 creates a prospective repeal for the Nuclear Decommissioning Citizen Advisory Panel, which date will be on January 1st, 2030. Section 6, which also begins on page 5, repeals the Vermont Prescription Drug Advisory Council. Of note, the Controlled Substance and Pain Management Advisory Council, which was what the commission was referring to last time, has actually been renamed in 2019. Just a technical matter, I want to point it out for clarity. And it's been renamed to Vermont Prescription Drug Advisory Council, which is currently listed in statute found in 18 VSA, section 4255, which will be repealed now. Section 7 on page 5 repeals the Natural Gas and Oil Resources Board. This bill is written, however, most of Title 29, Chapter 14, Natural Gas and Oil will be repealed with the exception of the prohibition on hydraulic fracturing in the very last section 5. This is for the reason that sections referencing the board are significantly entangled in the surrounding regulatory framework. References to the board cannot be cleanly excised. The entirety of the language is shown. This constitutes 4 pages of the bill. And this is shown for the purpose of drawing attention to this repeal of the regulatory structure in addition to the board itself. And the next section, go down to page 50, section 8. And this repeals the board on retail sales. Title 30 VSA.
Wait 1 second.
Sure.
I want to make sure that, where is this section on the hydrofracking?
49.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Got it.
Section 8 begins on page 50. New board on retail sales as under Title 30, Section 212B. The board is referenced in various parts of this section. Be cleanly removed through a series of deletions, mostly in a single section, subsection E. The best way of creating a prospective repeal from our perspective of the board would be to give this section a later effective date, as noted in section 12, the effective date section of this draft bill. Section 9, 50 as well, creates a prospective repeal for the Clean Energy Development Board on June 30th, 2025. Various subsections will have references size as well. Section 10, on page 58, repeals the Vermont Telecommunications Authority. Just a repeal on that. Section 11, on page 59, repeals and transfers the duties of the Private Activity Bond Advisory Committee. This amendment language was provided by the Treasurer's Office at the request of the Sunset Advisory Commission. And then this language was subsequently modified by our office to its drafting guidelines. Yes.
I'm going to go back a little bit because I was flipping pages. I'm sorry. Back on page 57, section 6, should that be stricken because it's talking about the BTA?
Sure, one moment. Okay, 57.
Good point.
Good catch.
Jay Johnson.
Sorry, just navigating there now. I apologize. Which line was that?
Start in line 8, section 6,
Okay, yes.
the 2 million.
Yes, we can examine that and, okay, I'm just making note of that now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for pointing that out.
So it's interesting then, $2 million would go to them. So will that $2 million just not go anywhere for small wind turbine? Or is that something, my guess is that natural resources might end up weighing in on this.
Yeah.
But
And I will also remove the reference to the acronym on line 12. Probably the. Okay.
so you're going to take out that whole 6?
The entirety 6 can be removed.
Yeah.
Or alternatively, I mean, this is certainly a policy determination if the commission wishes to redirect substitute a recipient or the entire.
I don't think we have the right to
Already
do
do
that. I don't.
And we'll go ahead and strike.
Yeah, and I think that once it's struck, probably either finance or natural resources will. Don't you think?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think how they would become aware of it. In other words, there's $2 million in the ether somewhere floating around. How would they?
I can certainly flag it for Adam Gresham. I mean, if that's helpful.
Yeah, well, it's American Recovery and Reinvestment Funds, right?
Been around for a long time, right?
Yeah, so where have they, because Vermont Telecommunications Authority has not been active. So where has that money gone to be?
Maybe it's long gone.
It may have already been used up and spent somewhere, but yeah, you should maybe, Rob, did you have a?
Well, I was kind of asking the same question you were, Jeanette, as far as, or Madam Chair. Has the money actually really ever been allocated? Or is it just, it's just never in the budget, but this verbiage just never caught up with it?
Right. So I think the best thing is to check with Adam and see, and then if it still is hanging around there and hasn't been allocated, then we should make sure that finance or natural resources probably, or appropriations probably, because they're the ones that are, okay. Okay, thank you.
Let's see, let's go down to section 10, just quickly, and that was let's go to section 11. Okay. Section 11 repeals and transfers the duties of the Private Activity Bond Advisory Committee. This statute can be found in Title 32 of VSA, section 994. This amendment language was provided by the Treasurer's Office at the request of the Sunset Advisory Commission, and then modified per our office's drafting guidelines. Section 12 on page 62 addresses effective dates, and for the most part, this will take effect upon passage, except a certain sections that are notified, namely at 9, regarding the Clean Energy Development Board, which will take place June 30th. I have to accommodate that kind of unorthodox way of drafting in a prospective appeal for that committee or board.
So we want to add government accountability.
Right, so we need a section on government accountability and then Tanya's definition of board and commission.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if I might, I found one yesterday, and I'm sorry I found it yesterday, but if we're fixing things, this one's really broken. It's the Vermont Employment Security Board. It's under labor. I looked and it was reviewed in 2021.
What page?
No, it's in my hand, Rob. I'm sorry. It's a statute.
Oh,
Vermont,
Under
what's
21.
it called?
Vermont, what page? Oh, I can tell you page of that. I'm sorry. Vermont Employment Security Board is number 178 on the spreadsheet. But it doesn't really I'm hoping we can fix it. It's not the same kind of technical questions. Tanya will appreciate it, but she's very busy. Hereby created a board of 3 members. Members of the board appointed by the governor with advice and consent of the Senate, 6-year terms. It's great because it says when the terms start and end. That's awesome. And then it says the governor shall designate a member of such board to be its chair. Great. Except for, we also have a conflicting one under labor, under unemployment compensation for whatever reason, the Department of Labor composition, the commissioner shall serve as the chair of the Employment Security Board as ex officio. Are there 3 members? Are there 4? Does the governor appoint the chair, not appoint the chair? If the governor appoints 3 members and not the commissioner of labor, now we have 2 chairs.
That would be fun.
Well, I tried to fix it and the response was, this has been for decades. It needs to be 3 because when there's a conflict, because they're not of the same political party. So a lot of times they are not all on the same page. So 3 is important to them.
Okay.
So I don't know if we can fix that here or not. And
So the language you like is in 21 VSA section 1302, right?
1302 minus the fact that either the governor should appoint 2 members and not appoint a chair.
And who does the other one say who the ex officio chair is?
The chair of the Employment Security Board shall be the commissioner of labor ex officio, and the deputy, if they're not available, can be the designee.
And then the other 2 are appointed by the governor. Okay.
It would fix that if it was 2 appointed by the governor and the governor did not appoint the chair. I thought Mike Harrington was going to kill me. Do not touch that. And I was like, well, it's broken.
So we could either decide to just fix it and choose one or the other, right? Or we could flag in here the conflict and ask it would be economic development and general, or no, who's
Commerce and economic.
commerce committees to review it and take testimony. We can do one or either fix it the way we want to, or flag it in here.
Well, if we fix it, commerce and economic development's probably going to see it.
Yeah,
And it's-
okay, that's the best way.
I was gonna say, and it's not gonna change how it's been functioning for 20 years, to be honest with you.
Let's change it, and that'll force them to do something if they don't like it. If we just suggest that they look at it, they're not going to.
No, they won't,
Got it. Okay,
especially with so many new chairs.
yeah. Okay, so did you get that, Tim? It's going to be 2 appointed by the governor, and the commissioner of labor will be it'll be an ex officio, but voting member.
Yep. And we'd strike the part about the governor appointing the chair.
Yeah,
Thank you. That's very helpful.
good catch.
Thank you.
So, I'm trying to think of who's been on this committee from the governor's appointees in the past, but I don't think the person doing boards and commissions has ever been on here before.
It was,
Yeah, Jason. Wasn't Jay? No, it was
well, Tori was for a short time, but
Tori was
Before that
very
was-
short time.
Pat's sister, we've talked about her a couple times.
Sue Zeller.
Yeah, Sue,
Zeller.
I think was the original appointee.
Yep.
I think.
She was.
Yeah, and she
But
was,
then Jason used to come to most of the meetings.
Jason came, yeah.
Up until my time here, everybody's always had other jobs as well. I've been lucky enough that I just do boards and commissions.
Oh, I see.
So that is one nice thing that has allowed me to focus my energies.
Oh, that's good, because we need help with boards and commissions, as we can see.
And we're
Good.
grateful for people like Tanya and Jay Johnson who help me all the time.
Yep. All right, so those 3 changes?
Can I ask one more question only because I don't understand?
Yeah.
When we talk about 2025, I know this is going to sunset today and we're done. What would happen if I found something like that 6 months from now?
I think you would bring it to the House Gov Ops committees.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
the 2 GovOps committees.
Yeah,
They can always reconstitute
yeah.
this committee.
I just thought it would be great.
Bye,
to-
Tanya.
Thank you, Tanya.
Or you could bring it to the Committee of Jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, if you find something between, say, now and when this bill's taken up either by Senate GovOps or House GovOps, it can always be amended.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, that one was just more blatant than, I found some little things, but that one was like, hey. So,
Good.
thank you.
All right, so should we give, who's going to do the per diem report? Who's presenting that? Is that you?
I can certainly give a primer.
So we have to decide whether we want to put in maximum amounts, is that?
All right, we should look up the language of what we're supposed to actually do.
Yeah, I think that was
Thought we were going to make a recommendation.
of whether or not there should be maximum
Isn't
amounts.
that when we had Jane and Mary in?
Yeah, they kind of wanted that, I think. I'm a little less committed to doing that, just because I think that if it's the agency or the department that has to justify both to the governor in their budget
In the legislature.
and the legislature in their budget, that they're not going to go hog wild because it's going to be harder to justify, but there may be reasons sometime that if we set the per diem limit at 175, there might be a reason why it really needs to be 180, and you've killed us. I mean, I'm less committed to having to set a cap.
So we're supposed to submit a written report to Appropriations and Government Operations Committees with a recommendation on whether to establish a maximum per diem rate for boards, commissions, councils, or committees, and any legislative actions necessary to increase uniformity and equality of per diem rates across state government.
Well, I think that last sentence is just very silly, because what we're saying is that they shouldn't be the same across.
Correct.
Yeah.
But we have provided a process.
Right.
For appropriations to review.
Right.
Per diems. Rob.
Thank you. I have to agree with the conversation that I'm hearing, that I think it's been, the intent has always been to have the different agencies and departments come in and defend their budgets. And this has been a part of that. And it's going to get a look through the administration. It's going to get a look through appropriations. It's going to get looked at many times. And this just seems to me to be an added layer. And it sort of defeats the purpose of having the agencies set these and scrutinize them if we're going to put an artificial cap in place.
Yeah, I agree, Rob. It's almost like putting handcuffs on them at the beginning, which to me doesn't make a lot of sense. So I don't know about having a written report. We can just say that we've decided to leave things the way they are.
I think we can do a very short report, and if we want to, I can write that right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it's just going to be to say that we don't, because we've set up this process, that we don't feel it's necessary to establish a cap or a maximum, and that this process should ensure that the equity across the state boards and commissions is based on the intensity of their service, as opposed to just making it the same for everybody.
Well put.
And that can be our report. All right.
Because otherwise we'd be picking an arbitrary number.
Yeah.
Out of thin air.
Yeah.
I might think it's $1.50 and you said it 175, so
Right.
he's right.
Read the last line to me again about equity.
Yeah.
So I can know how to say that.
And any legislative actions necessary to increase uniformity and equality of per diem rates across.
Uniformity
And equality.
and equality, which is what we don't want to do. Uniform and equality of per diems across, right?
Yeah, across state government.
Okay. What do we want to do? Should we see if we can get the language?
Well, Tanya's,
She's-
Andrea just forwarded us the language from Tanya, so we could take a look at that.
Okay, you'll have to read it to me. I don't have it.
Okay. Can you put it up
I can do it on
the screen?
I love it. Listen, I did have a phone with me this morning when that car went off the road. I can't believe that I actually did, and it was charged and it had minutes on it.
I can read it from here myself, but
Either way. Just it's a short change. There it is. Yep.
Whatever happened to Matt? Did you ever hear from him?
No. Maybe he doesn't have power. Who knows?
I did get notification from him that he's moving to Florida at the end of the year.
Oh,
So he was resigning from another board, so.
Huh?
I didn't see that coming. I don't know, that's a new thing, so.
I think that does it. So we've taken out federal statutes
Yep.
And
and
executive order.
executive orders. Statewide jurisdiction, carries out a state function. Is there a definition of state function somewhere?
I don't know.
Great by state law.
Oh, and it allows stuff, if you're on a board that's strictly municipal, you don't fall into this. Or county or regional. That's good. But I still don't know what a state function exactly is.
I think it reinforces that it has influence over the state. It's not, Tanya talked me through one of these when we were talking about one of the, it was more municipal. It was more focused and it was not a statewide board or
Okay.
commission. And it didn't fall under what they were working on. And I can't remember the name of the committee we were talking about.
I'm fine with that definition.
Yeah, that seems good.
And I'm just finishing reading Representative Brumsted's testimony. It's lengthy, but maybe Tim can pull out some,
Yeah, I think that there's just that one line in there that's needed, but I think it's important for her, for the chairs of Gov Ops to have that. And
well, it's posted on our website right now, so
Yeah.
that's good. Maybe just her last paragraph.
well, I think that she had some words right at the very beginning that were, but anyway, whatever, you decide that, I'm right.
The only
yes.
language in the first paragraph is include language in your formal final report that government accountability merits attention by the standing committees of
okay.
jurisdiction.
Okay, so it needs to be a little more than that.
But down there in conclusion,
Right. That's definitely should be in there.
yep.
There should be a comma after committees.
Okay, I have a letter to
You have our
them.
report?
I have our report. Do you want to hear it? Hopefully it is. I haven't proofed it at all, so hopefully it isn't too dumb. Okay. The Sunset Advisory Commission has done extensive research on the issue of per diems for boards and commissions, state boards and commissions. The two subjects we have been asked to make recommendations on are, should there be a maximum amount for per diems? And two, is legislative action needed to increase uniformity and equality of per diems across the state government? The process we established with the help of House and Senate appropriations committees allows each department and agency to determine appropriate per diem amounts for each of its entities. These amounts need to be justified in the governor's budget and again in the legislative budget. Therefore, we do not see a necessity in establishing a cap. In terms of uniformity and equity, or equality it is, our position is that the equality should be determined not by making them all the same, but by, I have to change this a little bit here because I don't know what it says, but by having some consistency in the per diems based on workload, responsibility, and something. This again will be justified during the governor's and legislative budgeting process.
Yeah, I would say you could use words like intensity of the work.
Okay.
You did say workload, but number of hours that someone is spending on a board or commission.
Time commitment.
Yeah. You know, all those things should be taken into consideration. And you're right, that does provide better equality than just saying
Everybody's.
$75 for everybody. Even if you sit home and do it on Zoom, give me my money.
Yeah.
Right.
So is something like that okay? I mean,
Yeah.
it isn't,
I think it's great.
okay.
Brian, are you talking about me?
If the shoe fits.
Every time somebody says that, I think of one of those horrible old jokes, which I will share with you when we're offline.
Okay.
Okay. So.
Might be about
Andrea,
you again,
can I
Rob.
ask if you would see if you can read my writing well enough to
Do we type it?
type it? My writing is, and I think we'd do it in memo form to House and Senate Government Operations Committee and the date and from, and then re.
Okay.
Thank you. If you can't, I will try and find a computer and do it. Thank you.
Good morning, Senator. This
Whoops.
is Ruth Hardy.
Hello?
I'm Larry Cooley. I didn't hit that button on purpose.
That was
What was that?
That was a voicemail. I shouldn't have, I
Oh,
thought I had shut my speaker off, but I guess I turned it back on.
so my suggestion is right now, I know it's a little bit early, but that we break for lunch, that we give Tim time to get that we look at this after it's in a better form and then come back and finish up. Does that make any
Yeah,
sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, so